Welcome back or welcome to in the Industry. I am a 22-year-old medical student and I'm curious about what my future will look like. My goal is to find and interview people who are a few steps ahead of me in their careers and find out how they got to where they are. But more than that, I want to find out who they really are, what drives their success, and what pearls of wisdom they have for myself and other women at the beginning of our careers. Today, I had the pleasure of speaking to my housemate Tracey, who is just a fascinating individual. We spoke about things like climate change, social and humanitarian work, as well as things like non-traditional careers and burnout and fatigue professionally and personally. And I think this was such an interesting conversation and I'm really energized by it. So I hope you get something out of it. And here we go. Hi, Tracey. Thank you so much for joining me today. I'm so excited to be able to pick your brain about all the things that you've done in the past and you're currently doing, and you just have a lot on, so I'm really excited. And Tracey's also my housemate, so I'm calling from work, you're at home, I'll be home for dinner.
It's better than doing it from the other room, isn't it?
Yeah, that would be a bit weird. So look, you do so much, and I feel like every time we talk, like I think the other day when we were working out, you were like, oh yeah, I almost was a firefighter once. And you seem to have almost done everything or done everything. And so I think it's important to probably start by outlining a little bit of a few of the things that you've done, just so that people know who we're working with. So I did a bit of a stalk of your LinkedIn profile. So here we go. So you're currently working at Australian Progress. Australian Progress is an organisation focused on social and environmental reform. You're also a co-founder at Enzo. So that, as I understand it, it's a pre-employment training and partnership for refugees. And then in the past, you've done so many things like Deputy Director of the Australian Youth Climate Coalition, Campaign and Engagement Contractor for the Federation of Community Legal Centres. And on your little LinkedIn profile, you also have all the causes you are passionate about, which includes climate change, First Nations, racial injustice and social injustice, legal union LGBTQI movements, and sustainable energy and transport systems. And you were also recently awarded the Rockefeller Foundation and Acumen Academy Social Innovator Award.
It does sound like a lot when you say it all together, doesn't it?
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, no, I think that pretty much sums it up. I think, I kind of came to working in like social change late in my life. So I also had like 2 or 3 random careers before that, which was totally different trajectories.
I wanted to ask about that actually, because you have talked in the past about having, I guess, a bit of a non-traditional career trajectory, and you've tried so many different things. Can you tell me a bit of an outline of how you started, what made you switch, all those kind of chapters of your career?
Yeah, totally. So I did have a semi non-traditional path, I would say. I didn't go to university straight after high school. Instead, I went and worked in, oh my God, what was it? I worked in a logistics company security company, Wilson Security. And for the first 3 months there, I cried every day after work. And it was so sad. There were no windows in the office. And it was like my first kind of office job that I'd ever had. And I started as like a part-time data admin assistant. It was just like, deciphering security guards' handwriting was like 90% of my job. Yeah. Anyway, so you can imagine it was.
Can we pause there for a second? Tell me more about why, like what was that feeling of, why were you crying every day? Did you feel trapped? Did you feel like, what was that?
Yeah, I felt, I guess like I wasn't used to, what was the feeling? I guess I wasn't really used to working in an office, but I also just felt like I had no soul, or like all my soul had been kind of taken away. And so the feeling was just like despair, I would say, like complete despair. So, and I think as well, like I'd grown up being like, you're kind of like selling out if you like go get an office job in a sense. So it was, and then I kind of got the worst office job that you could get for someone like me anyway. And so I did that for 3 months, and then I kind of worked my way up a little bit, and it became a little bit more bearable. I became like the logistics manager for the company, and then like client services manager, managing like a bunch of like client tenders and that kind of stuff. So it was, still not one of the best jobs that I've ever had, but it became more and more bearable as I kind of like learned new skills and like really like took on new challenges. So I did that for 2 years, and then I became a planning a planning designer, like designing roads and like traffic management. And I did that for a couple years before I went back to uni. And then when I went to uni for the first time and studied renewable energy engineering, and that was kind of around the same time that I was looking for something else to engage with in life. And I got involved at the Australian Youth Climate Coalition. I got involved there, and I became the state director there in WA. And during that time, I kind of came to Melbourne a few times for various like volunteering activities. And then I decided to move here, and that's kind of when I started working at AYCC.
Right.
Yeah, that's kind of where it picks up, where you like it left off.
Sure. Yeah, something that you just said kind of took my interest, which was you thought that if you were to take an office job, it would be like a bit of a sellout. Is that what you said? Like what?
Yeah.
What was that? How did you think? Okay, I guess 2 questions. How did you think your career would pan out? Like, what were your goals at that age and that time? And why was, taking that office job such a, like, that feeling of, being trapped and, I guess, in your eyes, a failure?
Totally. I'll start with the second question first, I guess. And I think it really goes back to like the way that I grew up. So I think Mum was really the person that taught me to question things and to ask questions, like even when it's really, really hard. And we used to go camping for months at a time. She would pull me out of primary school to take me camping, me and my brother camping. And we kind of grew up believing that the natural world was really sacred. And that was the place where we were able to connect the most as a family. And so I kind of had this like upbringing, and my mum was also a wildlife carer as well. And so I kind of had this upbringing of feeling all of this freedom of like traveling around so much as a young kid, I really kind of like lent into that as well, like as an adult. And so I think being inside in an office was kind of the opposite of that. And I think very clearly remembering that there were like no windows is kind of illustrative of the way that really like manifested in that job. Yeah.
And so how did you think your career would pan out? So at that time, were you thinking that, you were going to work in a different area or do something completely different? Like, what was the plan?
Yeah, I wouldn't have said that I had much of a plan at that point in time. I think, to be honest, at that point in time, I was just, I wouldn't have said that I was thinking about my career in a sense. I kind of had this sorry?
What were you thinking about if it wasn't your career? What was the the core?
Well, I've kind of had this mentality for like my entire life, which is that even if you can't see how what you're doing will like somehow open up opportunities in the future, like often it does. And so even though I really disliked that job and I didn't much like my next job, they both gave me the skills that I needed in order to get in order to then find work in an area that I really liked. So I think at that point in time, what was I thinking about? So I was 18, 19, I think at that point in time. I'd spent a few months in Africa the year before. I'd come back. I had just bought my first house. What was I thinking about? I was kind of just thinking about like how to get through each day. I would say my eyes were much like lower down, like weren't really lifted to the horizon. So I think that's kind of more what I was thinking about, to be honest. I wouldn't have said I had much like, what is the right word? I wouldn't have said that I like had it in my brain that I was working towards where I am today at that point in time. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. And I'm curious, knowing what you know now, and it seems like you're in a really good place career-wise. You're really so involved in what you do. How would you define success with all of that in mind?
Define success in life?
Yeah. Like, what is your success?
What is my success? In like my whole life or right now?
Wherever you want to take it.
Wherever you want to take it. How would I define success? I mean, I think that's like it's like a very broad question, right? Like, yeah, like how is success defined for your life really shapes the life that you kind of look for, right? So often in our society, success is defined by the amount of things that you own, or the price of the things that you own, or the paycheck that you get, or the like those kinds of things. And it's really hard to break out of that, I think, especially as like a young person, right? I think is especially hard to break out of that. And maybe for some people that is actually what success looks like for them. I think for me, success looks like having deep connections with the people that I really care about, with friends and family. Success looks like being able to have the experiences that I want, like in my life. So I think there is still an element of like, the security, the funds to be able to do that. But yeah, being able to like have new experiences and experiences that enrich life. And then I think success also looks like being healthy enough to enjoy those first two things. And finally, I think for me, one of the biggest pieces, and I don't know if success is the right term, but I think there's this piece around contributing to a world that is bigger than yourself and your immediate circle. And so that for me, success would be leaving the world in a better place than I found it, I think.
Yeah.
In the simplest way. Yeah.
Yeah, amazing. I really like that idea of service to others as, I guess, driving a more meaningful life. And I was listening to Minding Mastery podcast with Michael Gervais. I don't know if you know it, but I've been obsessed with it recently. And I forgot what episode it was, but they were talking about the difference between a happy life and a meaningful life, with the happiness being this fleeting, moment of serotonin release, and you feel like you're on top of the world, which is great, and that can happen, but it's just not as sustainable and as, I don't know, like substantial as doing things that are meaningful and purpose driven, which is not necessarily always going to be like happy or fun or enjoyable. Like there's something a bit more to it. Like you will endure things that you might not necessarily like, back-to-back meetings all afternoon, or you'll, sit and work all night or something like that. But it's this feeling of like being driven. That is something else entirely.
It's a bit more gritty, it's a bit more gritty. And I think the words that you were using there, like more enduring, whereas like happiness is like can be more fleeting, I think. And yeah, I think one of the things you just, as you're talking, reminded me is like, you can go looking for happiness, and like sometimes you'll catch it and sometimes you won't, but rarely you'll hold on to it if that's the like sole purpose of what you're looking for. But if you're like looking and you kind of like, and you're building meaning, then like happiness comes through the meaning.
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess that's a good segue to talk about how to get involved in social organizations like what you do. And I guess what I'm particularly interested in is, so last weekend, actually, I don't think you were there, but so myself and the other housemates, we were watching the latest David Attenborough documentary, A Life on Our Planet. And it was an incredible documentary. I recommend everyone who's watching this to go watch it, because it was, even for someone who, I think I've been very environmentally conscious for most of my life. And it's something that I'm very passionate about. It just shone a very, like, I guess, different light and a sense of urgency like I've never felt before. So I guess my question is, for someone who is not working in environmental conservation and, you know, social justice and things like that as their core career. So for example, me, I'm studying medicine. How can I incorporate being environmentally, you know, conscious and driving change in that way? And I'm not talking about things like avoiding single-use plastics and saving water and things like that, like individual things that we all do, hopefully already. But I'm more like, how do we integrate it into our careers in a meaningful way, when it's not our like core career, if that makes sense. Sorry, that was a very long question.
No, I totally get that. Yeah. I'm going to take a step back first and kind of explain the sector that I work in a little bit more, and then kind of answer through that. So I work in the like not-for-profit sector at the moment, and there's so many facets to that sector. There are there are like service delivery organizations, which is what most people think of when you say you work at a charity or a not-for-profit. And those are the organizations that you see, giving blankets to people that are homeless, or like providing like care to like women who are escaping like domestic abuse, or like anything that is like a service that you are delivering. And those are the organizations that most people think of. And then there are other organizations which are more advocacy-based organizations, and they campaign to, or advocate to change the system or the law or the rules or whatever that we operate within that are like either unjust or unequal, or like are ruining the environment or whatever. So an example of that is would be trying to make sure that there isn't a coal port built on the Great Barrier Reef, is an example of like an advocacy organization, many advocacy organizations. Or a very easy example that springs to mind is the legalization of gay marriage in Australia. So that campaign was run by many organizations advocating for that over many years, and then it became this like national moment of action where a lot of people were involved. And so I work in an organization that works to support a lot of other organizations in this ecosystem at the moment. And so there are like social justice organizations on like LGBT rights, or like environmental justice organizations, or First Nation justice organizations fighting for self-determination of First Nations people in this country, as well as like unions. And, it's like a melting pot of like so many organizations. And so in terms of like, what can someone do if it's not like their core piece of work, it really depends on the kind of change that they want to see in the world. So taking your example, for instance, of like environmental, even within environmental, it's like, is that like because you want to do something about climate change? Or is that because you want to make sure that, like we still have forests in like 100 years, and those things kind of tie together, but they also are separate goals.
So are you saying that it's one thing, I guess, like on a very practical level, like, okay, say I'm 10 years in the future in my career, because I have no money now, but say that in 10 years time I have money and I want to donate it, but then I also have time and I want to use that towards, you know, a cause. What, you know, if you had to choose one, is it like throwing money at the situation, which I know that it is useful in certain industries and sectors, or is it actually being another voice adding to that movement, or that what is the thing that I can do?
Yeah. So there's I mean, in 10 years, I'm not sure what the landscape will be, but right now there's kind of a myriad of different ways. So in terms of a practical sense, if we're talking about climate change, you talked before about like not using single-use plastics and blah blah blah, and those are the things that we all know, the top 10 individual things that we can do to help save the environment, and they work on an individual level. But in terms of actually adding your voice to like a collective movement and kind of amplifying the power that you have like as a citizen in Australia, some of the things that you can do is divesting. So putting your money where it is ethical to put your money. So that can be in terms of like a bank account, but it can also be in terms of your superannuation, and letting banks know why you do that. And so there's like a whole bunch of global movements around divesting from banks that fund fossil fuel projects, for instance, because fossil fuel projects are one of the main drivers in climate change. And in Australia especially, that's a huge, one of the main things that we're dealing with is to try and like remove investment in fossil fuels. So there's practical things in terms of like moving your money, in terms of donating, and donating versus time. It's kind of a, you've really kind of come to this like core of an age-old like tension, I guess. And I would say that there's no harm in doing both. And I would say that I would say that you need to do your research in terms of like where to donate money. And I think if you're looking for places to donate right now, there are some amazing First Nations justice organisations that I would recommend donating to either work on climate change or to work on, and we're moving into a different sector now, but to work on like reforming the criminal justice system as well. So that would be tying in with like the Black Lives Matter movement and racial justice, that we're kind of seeing as like a global moment for that. So there are these few kind of like leading movements that you can see really surfacing at the moment. One is around climate change and one is around racial justice. And then we also have this third one that's emerging because of COVID, which is around economic justice and how do we build a fairer system for all, an economic system. And so I would say at the moment, those are the three leading, the three in this global moment where we're in a global pandemic, and there's like so many intersecting crises, and it can be really daunting and really hard to be like, well, where do I start? I
was just going to say, like, that's exactly, you've just touched on the feeling that I've had in the past, which is so linked to this sense of overwhelm and just not, I guess it's the equivalent of like choice paralysis, but in terms of like action paralysis, if that's a thing. Like, you know, the issues are so huge, and for me, it's been climate change that I've just been so like very stressed about, but to the point where I don't actually know, like, where to start, what to do, and what the balance is between my role as an individual and then my role as an individual pressing on institutions and companies and, you know, the bigger structures that are driving this. Yes, I think all of that's really interesting.
And it is this point that a lot of people feel in Australia and around the world, right? Is that it's just like you shut down, right? And you're like, it's just too hard to actually do anything. So instead it goes in a box and, you bring it out at Christmas or whatever.
The Christmas table conversations.
Yeah.
Well, that was the other thing that I really loved about this David Attenborough, the latest documentary, was he did a really good job of absolutely terrifying us and, and really shocking us with where we're headed in a very real way, like used lots of numbers and stats and facts and just and also a lot of emotion. Like, it was a side of him that I had never seen before. So that was really interesting. But then he kind of did a bit of a pivot towards the end of the film and started talking about all those things that we can do, and actually began talking really optimistically about it. And I noticed myself just sitting there, feeling that overwhelm that I mentioned, and just thinking, what am I supposed to do about this? Like, thanks for telling me, but like, just to feel so empowered to actually do the things that he said. And the things, for example, were eating predominantly like plant-based foods, and really and foods that are grown in a very sustainable way, avoiding like palm oils and things that are resulting in deforestation, all that kind of stuff. And by the end of it, I was just like, oh, I'm so like, I'll do all those things. And he kind of painted this imaginary future. There were some clips, I think they were like edited clips of forests and cities and drones flying around, and it was all very futuristic, and that was really cool to see. I'm wondering about, when you're doing this, these like campaigns and these social justice movements, so much of it is about communication. I'm wondering, how do you convince someone, and what language do you use to communicate the urgency of those causes?
Yeah. I mean, I think that's a really good question. But just before I touch on it, I kind of just wanted to rewind a tiny second to the kind of options that you were talking about, David Attenborough giving at the end of the documentary. And I just wanted to quickly touch on that, because I love David Attenborough. I haven't seen that documentary, but he's such an icon, and he's done so much for environmental justice and conservation in Australia. And I think, it is really important to eat, to minimize meat consumption and to stay away from palm oil. But I do just want to lift up one thing, which is that, corporations account for, 60 to 70% of fossil fuels and environmental degradation. So I do think there is a moment where we need to kind of look beyond what we're using and eating and consuming as like an individual. How can we influence those corporations or those governments? And it is really important to do that individually as well. But I kind of just wanted to draw out that, like, even if every person in the world did that, we would still have 70% of the problem that we have now. So it actually does require, we're kind of talking before about like, what are the individual things you can do? And then like, what are the things that you can do that like contribute to shifting that broader system that, like that like would actually bring us to the like kind of utopia that, he showed at the end of the movie. So I just wanted to touch on that first. But I think the thing that you're really talking about, oftentimes we're presented with like challenges in terms of like, oh, climate change is so hard, it's overwhelming. What's often left out is the hope. And so that's really what I heard coming through strongly for you. Sounds like the documentary was done incredibly well. It kind of really took you through, this is how horrible it is or could be. But actually, like, that's not where we're going to end it, because people don't act from a place of despair. People shut down from a place of despair. And people don't act from a place of fear. People shut down from a place of fear. And the emotions and the way that you really communicate with people that like moves them to action is this hope. It's like a hope that things can be different. It's like to hope that things can be different, and to also see the path to get there as well. So bringing that hope into any communication is like so critically important. Otherwise, what you were explaining is like shutting down, like it's just very overwhelming, is like such a natural human response. Yeah. So I think you kind of hit the nail on the head. Like, that is the most critical element.
Yeah. And I guess to extrapolate that quickly to your communication with companies, where does that fit in? Like, can we use that language as well for those bigger corporations? Like, does it kind of fall apart when it,
fall apart? What we do know, right, about corporations is that they listen to their customers and they listen to their shareholders. That's the way that we've been able to move other businesses. For example, there was a campaign to stop financing for this coal port on the Great Barrier Reef. So there was this campaign to basically to let the big four banks in Australia know how much their customers didn't want that. And so what that involved was many customers from like Westpac and CommBank and ANZ, and not all at the same time, but many customers and many staff members that were inside those very banks telling the bank that this isn't what they wanted, this isn't the future that they wanted. And, you know, eventually that campaign won. It's like a really clear example of, it is hope for some businesses, but it's also, I mean, we're talking about like complex systems at the moment and complex like national and international economics, but more and more it actually becomes more economically viable and even better for many companies to make the switch. It may be not in the short term, but in the long term. And as that slowly starts to happen, you can see around the world the like ripple effect of companies investing in like renewable energy. And in Australia in particular, it's difficult, right? It's difficult because we rely as an export on a lot of fossil fuels as a country. So we rely on that as like one of the main sources of economic stability. So the government doesn't want to stop that, right? Like that is like something that we rely on as Australia. So it's like incredibly difficult. So that's why you see, compared to some other countries in the world that are actually much more ahead of us in terms of like taking action on climate change, it's why Australia is a little slower, because we have this like huge reliance on a system that is in direct contradiction to taking action on climate change. And making that shift is really challenging.
Right, totally. Wow, okay, that was a lot.
It's a lot.
I wanted to quickly shift gears actually, and just go back to, I'm curious about burnout and about fatigue and what you do to combat them, if there is anything that you do, you know, what's your relationship with those things?
Yeah, I mean, it's really challenging for a lot of people in the sector that I work in for multiple different reasons. So for one, a lot of people come through as volunteers. So people are used to volunteering their time and not getting paid, which can sometimes lead to like, you know, an interesting culture around what you get paid for and what you don't get paid for. And another reason is that everyone is so incredibly passionate and are working on things that are really close to home. So that also lends itself to working as much as is needed to get the job done, right? So I think there can be some, you know, there can be burnout and there can be fatigue, and there can be, work-life balance can be a struggle, I think, at times. So it really comes down to being able to say no. And that's really hard sometimes. Like if you're, as an example, if you were working on the gay marriage campaign a couple of years ago, and, you know, you're like, oh, cool. Do I work 40 hours a week? And maybe we lose, you know, or it's very real, you know, like it's very real. So a lot of people working on things that are very real to them. Or do I work 60 or 70 hours a week and like give it my all and like try and win? And, you know, there are moments where you might do 70 hours and then there are moments where you might do 30.
ESCOM paging issues. Yellow, ESCOM paging issues.
Did you hear that?
That's all right. Yeah. I can hear it.
Oh, it's part of working in a hospital.
It's fine.
You continue. So what are the things that you do when you're not working that restores a bit of that balance?
For me, what
energizes you apart from work?
What energizes me? I'm a pretty active person, so I really love rock climbing, and I really love hiking. I really love getting out of the city. So it's been especially hard during lockdown to deal with lockdown. Yeah, I think I travel a lot. I go on lots of different experiences and adventures. I'm energized by having really great chats with mates or hanging out with mates. I'm trying to think, to be honest, I'm trying to think about what it is in a non-lockdown world, because I feel like life has just shifted so radically in the last 6 months. So I'm trying to remember back to that period. What
do you think this year has taught you about all of these things and about work-life balance, if anything?
Sorry. This year has...
Why are you laughing?
I'm laughing because I'm deciding how cynical to be.
Cool, okay.
I think this year has taught, like, my life, I would say, is still quite busy in lockdown. Even so, this year has taught me the value of being a little bit slower. I was actually reflecting on this with a friend the other day, how I would often, in a social sense, like triple book my evenings or my weekends and would frantically run from one thing to the next. For every hour of like living when you're awake, you should have 10 minutes of downtime where you're just like either just like sitting or thinking or writing, but like not engaging in external kind of like stimulus. I don't think it's like a necessarily an exact science, but more just like a guideline that kind of along with lockdown has like helped me realize that like just because you're awake doesn't mean you have to be doing something productive or social.
Yeah. Wow. I should probably listen to that a little bit more. I feel very restless when I'm not, and also guilty when I'm not doing something productive. Yeah, totally. I need to incorporate that.
And it's hard to not at the moment as well when, you know, we constantly see people being really productive, like online, everywhere we look. So I definitely resonate with that. I'm like, oh, but I'm not doing anything. Like, what a waste.
Yeah. Feels like we need to compensate with everything standing at a standstill this year in terms of like being able to, go double speed ourselves and individually.
Yeah.
I think that was all the main questions I had to ask you. Do you want to add anything else, or is any other burning questions or anything else?
I'm curious, what does success look like for you?
Ooh, okay. If you had asked me about 12 months ago, I would have said success is working my way, studying my way to being a consultant as early as possible. So consultant by like early 30s.
A medical consultant?
Yeah, so being a consultant doctor in the hospital, or like in America, it's called the attending. So, being like a surgeon or a neurologist or a nephrologist, like one of those, anything that you can put an ist at the end, is a consultant. So getting to that point as possible, getting to the point of financial, stability as soon as possible. So actually, earning a certain threshold. Yeah, I guess I would have said just everything related to being as far in my career on this single trajectory as possible. And I think now I would say, this year has really prompted a reassessment of my values, my really core values, and what means the most to me in my life. Success is balance and feeling content enough with, relationships and friendships and fitness and exercise and work and hobbies, especially hobbies, and like having them all feeding into each other. And since meeting you and you guys in your house, I think learning how to climb and surf and do yoga and do all these things have just added so much to all the other aspects of my life. So I think success is now like being at a place where I can do the things that I love to do and do it with the people who I really love as well. Yeah. That was a very long answer.
Great. There's got to be some good things that come out of a global pandemic.
Yeah, I think so. I think it's definitely called for a lot of reflection from a lot of people, for better or for worse. And I guess from here on, there's going to be a lot of changes made. And yeah, I'm kind of terrified, but also kind of excited to see what those changes are going to be, because I think it could potentially be a really good catalyst for a lot of positive change. Yeah. Cool.
Amazing.
Okay. I'm gonna stop recording. Are you good? Are you G?
Yeah, I'm good.
Okay.
I'm G.